Here we go. So, sorry. Okay, I'm Neil Stubbings again. I'm going to talk about Looney shaders, or more simply said, manual and procedural approaches to creating stylized look that mimic traditional illustration techniques. I've heard that GPU-based photorealistic rendering is the bee's knees these days. So everything looks really super photorealistic. And I went out the other day getting some shopping, doing some errands, and I found the Octane and the Redshift crowd fighting with the crypto miners over some graphics cards. And then outside the stores, of course, were the gamers wanting their graphics cards back. So this is all the rage these days. But me too. I like working with GPU renderer once a while. Um, Even if it's if the material is somewhat photorealistic, I like to keep it in a very stylized way, the shapes in a very stylized way. These are some illustrations of the English football team for the World Cup. And once in a while, I always try to get out of my comfort zone and do something that's very uncomfortable for me, that was rendered in Octane. It's not something that I would like do for a client, but it's always nice to challenge yourself and do something that's not really your comfort zone. But usually I really love to work in a very stylized or illustrative way. So today we're going to look at three approaches to get that illustrative, stylized look. The first approach would be a very manual approach with hand-painted textures. This frame is from my short film Stopover. And the second approach would be a mixture between hand-painted textures and procedural textures. This is a frame from my yet unfinished short film Sunday. And the third approach would be a fully procedural approach based on this image and this tree, which I recently posted on social media. And they have gotten quite some feedback on Twitter. Apparently, it changed this guy's opinion about 3D graphics, which is great. And people got really interested in the process behind these images. So they were wondering how it was done, and they started demanding tutorials. And even Orestes wants to know how it's done. And then it was this tweet telling me that I have a moral obligation to tell you guys how it's done. So we're going to address this later on. But first, we're going to look at the look and feel of this style, where it comes from. So I grew up watching all these great cartoons and films that were hand animated and hand painted, and they had so much great background plates. Look at this rock, for instance. It's such a beautiful texture, and it's very simply done. So this is a great inspiration for me. This is a frame from The Lion King, I believe. And it's just like, these are really extremely beautiful paintings, and they have such a nice warm style and such an analog, of course, feel, because they have been done manually. Look at this, for instance. That's just amazing. I love this style. So I was looking for ways to have this kind of appeal together with modern 3D technology, and I wanted to like combine both the look and the ability to have something in 3D, so you can like have turnarounds or have camera moves. So yeah, this is more inspiration This is a great example for texture. You can almost make out the brush strokes there. So why does this look hand painted? Of course, it's because it is hand painted. But if you break it down, I at least think it's all about the gradients. Because the big difference between something that's been done by hand and something that's been done by a computer is the computer is just way too perfect. Whereas if you paint a gradient by hand, it will have some variation and some imperfection in it. So if you look at this obviously looks 3D rendered. Actually looks 3D rendered from the 90s. So if you lose all the gradients, you get something like this, which is commonly known as a cartoon shader or a cell shader nowadays. It looks better, but you lose some definition in the creases, and it just gets a really flat feel. So if you take the whole thing and you paint it in 3D, it gets a really analog or a hand-painted look, of course. So which brings me to the first approach, the completely hand-painted approach. This is a short film I've done 7 years ago, but I think the look still holds up and it does not feel dated yet. Whereas if I've done it in 3D with the 3D render, which was available in 2011, it would look dated today. I wouldn't change anything here if I had to do it again, except for the animation. The animation is a little bit jaggy, of course, or I hope that in the last 7 years my animation improved. But other than that, I think it's still a really nice movie. So let's have a look. So yeah, To get this look, for instance, as an example, this asteroid, you have to paint the textures meticulously by hand. And you need, this is the same here, just with a single light source. And you need UVs for everything, of course. And it's a very cumbersome process. It's very authentic, though. This is the same example again with the 3D light source. Here, a different geometry. And here, the background plate is completely hand painted. With this look, compositing is very important. This is the way the renderer spits it out. By the way, this is just a standard renderer from Cinema 4D. And with a little bit of compositing, it looks like that. Add a depth pass, some particles for the haze, and it makes a really big difference. Some more examples. Change the color of his suit and the spaceship in post as well. So yeah, this is a nice approach to get a really hand-painted look, but it's cumbersome. You have to UV unwrap everything. You have to paint everything. Yeah. So for my next short film, I try to be a little bit more efficient, time efficient. So I try to find some more approaches, so I don't have to UV unwrap everything and paint everything. So this is the partly procedural approach. I've been working on this on and off for a few years now, as I do this stuff on the side just to keep me sane between the bread and butter jobs. And I do this without financing, so I just work on it whenever I have time. So this is still unfinished because I've been held up by jobs and talks for software companies. So this is a small preview of this upcoming movie, which I hope to have finished before I get pensioned. It's about a penguin. It's a very hot summer day down at the South Pole. Penguin is hot. He finds an ice cream vending machine, and he goes and tries to buy an ice cream from this vending machine. Of course, his favorite flavor is sold out, so he tries a second option, and nothing happens. He gets really mad, annoyed and mad, and things take an unexpected turn. So this guy operating the vending machine, he's sleeping, it's very hot, and of course he ate all the ice cream himself. So there's some very cartoony stuff going on with explosives, some minor violence, and it gets really, really weird afterwards. Yeah, there's of course outer space involved, hamburgers, and the car's back, and this guy's back as well. So yeah, hope to have it finished the next few years, hopefully. This is an illustration I've done which sparked the idea for the movie. This is the geometry. Note that it's very, very simple. It's more or less a tube with a beak and some teeth. And for the text, I started painting the textures the same way as I did for the stopover movie. And it felt very boring to do the same thing over again. So I decided I want to have something a little bit different, something a little bit more reduced, a little bit more radical maybe. And so I was experimenting with different textures, This looks weird, like he peed himself or something. Or this way, just a single brush stroke was a bit too dirty. So in the end, I settled for this, which was very subtle painted textures and some noise overlay from Cinema 4D just to give it some variation. Here's the small guy. And that noise technique, I really like that. It's just an easy way to get some variation in your textures. So if you look at this asset, for instance, the vending machine, it's nothing more than a color and two noises that have been overlaid over that color. And there's a really extremely amazing shader called the Grunge shader by Paul Everett. I believe his website is c4dplugins.com or so. And it's a grunge shader which gives you a really nice painterly look. This is all on the shader. This is not hand painted. And it's originally intended for architecture renderings to give the architecture a bit more a grungy or a used look. But it can be used for a lot of different things. For a painterly look, for instance. So here it's just used on the metal parts. By the way, the grunge shader is not yet working for R20. I talked to Paul, and he's probably not going to update it for R20 because the demand is just too low. So if you guys could all like shoot Paul an email that he has to update the grunge shader, I'd be really happy because I want to keep using it for my stuff. So yeah, it's very apparent here in the inside. You see in the green parts that streaky stuff. That's all the grunge shader. And then again, combined with some noise in the gradient and just a color layer. It's even more apparent here in the floating burger joint. In the metal parts, here's a close-up. Again, it's combined with other noises. In one case, it acts as a mask for a noise, so you get a little bit more variation in the surface. Here's a close-up, just on a cube, and you see the metal tiling. This is an image texture, but everything else is just is purely procedural. What's great about the grunge shader is it really reacts great to the geometry. So in recessed parts, it gets a little bit darker, and it reacts to the corners of the geometry, which is also a downside because it doesn't really work well on rounded geometry. So you can see that it just makes lines at every edge. So you can't really use it for round stuff, but it's great for like edgy, really geometric stuff. So in the eyes, the real hero for me is the eyes because it took quite some tinkering to get it right. The first tests look really terrible. Doesn't really look icy at all. Looks a little bit weird, plasticky. This is a bit better, but still looks some kind of like some weird plastic. Then I went back out of frustration, thinking that maybe a bit of reduced approach would be better. Didn't like that either, so I kept on tinkering. And this was better, but there's still a little bit too much going on for a background plate. Keep in mind, this is just like background stuff. So with a little bit of adjustment, we're getting there. This was way better. And I finally settled for this. And if you look at the shader, it's really, really very simple. There's no subsurface scattering going on as you would have expected probably for a nice shader. But basically, it's just noise, of course, on the color layer, then some Fresnel in the luminance channel, and some noise, slight noise in the bump channel. That's it. This is how it comes out of the render engine. Already looks quite good, but again, with a little compositing, you can really make it pop. So again, compositing is really important. For that, I have, besides the beauty pass, of course, I have masks for every major material, ambient occlusion pass, just to like be able to manipulate the different major materials on their own. Some overall color correction, and the next step is really important for me, at least, because again, you can, although it looks already looks hand painted, you can see that the lines are perfectly straight, of course, because computer is perfect and he makes the line really perfect. So what I do is I run it through a series of adjustment layers in After Effects, just to give them some more imperfection and to break up the lines a little bit more. So it looks a little bit more hand painted. The strength of this is crucial though, because if you overdo it, it's going to look weird when it's animated. It's going to look like it's you watching it through a stained glass or something. So it's important to not to just do it on a still image, but to also like do it on an animation and just tone it down a little so it doesn't look weird. But for like still images, you can really push it. And this is a close-up of the poster. And you can see that here, where actually the line would be straight, it gets a really nice hand-painted, almost like watercolory look. Here, it's very apparent here with the straight lines. It looks like it's been done by hand. So, as a third step, the completely procedural approach. Here's that infamous tree and the 7 dwarfs pop. And the way these things are done, or the textures of these things, it's actually very simple. It's all just noise. There's such a wide variety of Cinema 4D noises I have yet to see in any other renderer. I've not seen this variety in Redshift or Octane. They have just some turbulence and some basic noise. But here you have 32 noises which look completely different. And they have funny names like Stuppel, which seems to be the Bavarian noise, and Booyah, which seems to be the Jamaican one. So even if you take one noise and you scale it up like 5,000%, it becomes a completely different noise again. So with 32 noises and that much of variation you can bring into it, you have like hundreds of different texture variations which you can use to tweak your shaders. So let's look at the basic paint shader setup. This is what we're going to do. Painted sphere. We'll start with a sphere, obviously, and a single infinite light source. And what I like to do is I like to work on a neutral background, like something grayish, because working on black is just too not natural, because it's going to be on some kind of background anyway. So just like put in a neutral, like 50% gray or something, and then an environment object with around 75% strength, just to brighten up the dark parts. So all there is an infinite light source, a background, and an environment object. So we can start with a layer shader. Of course, everybody's expecting me to do this with nodes now, but I was in a hurry and wasn't feeling very comfortable with the node system yet, so it's still just a layer shader for now. I'll try to recreate this sometime with the node system, but for now it's just layers. So we'll start with a basic color and add the Loomis shader. The Loomis shader is really great because it's a shader for which you can have the complete lighting of the scene within one shader. So what you can do is you can add different color to the spec channel. So you get a nice little variation in the colors. So it's not just a flat pink. It has a little bit of variation and gives it more depth. So as a second step, here comes the noise. First noise layer, and then some more noise in different colors, just to give it some more variation, because like keep in mind that you want to avoid anything that's too perfect. So you want to get a really hand-painted look. So you have to find ways to break it up and make it really imperfect. So I add different colors with masks, which are noises, all on top of each other, and it starts to get a very painted or analog look. This top layer, the paint layer, is actually a proprietary plugin which I developed. It's available from my site for $990 a month. So go there and buy this plugin. I'd be very happy. No, of course not. It's just a layer shader with a stack of noises again, which is overlaying the rest and breaks it up even more. The red was a little bit too strong, so I toned it down a little. And we're pretty much done for the color channel. Let's add some specular layers. I'll go in the reflectance channel, and then again, same thing. I'll just keep on adding layers, various spec layers of different colors, and use a noise as a mask, so it doesn't have that perfect look. So even more, and all in all, 6 specular layers, and it already has a nice hand-painted look for now, but we can add a little bit more zing. I'll add again a layer shader with a Fresnel in the luminance channel. And then, where are we? Yeah, again, my plugin, of course, the layer shader with the noises overlaid to break it up a little bit more. And then the luminance, the Loomis shader again, just to mask off like the shadowy parts of the whole thing. So it keeps the Fresnel just on the side of where the light comes from. And that's it. Bam, you have a paint shader. Sometimes it might look a little bit too noisy, too much going on, depends on your model, depends on your style. So it's just mostly it's just a matter of scaling. These two are just cubic projections of the whole thing. So if you scale it up, the one on the right, scale it up really big, it gets a little bit more simple, but still has that the painterly look. But it depends on the style you're looking for and the detail you're going for. For instance, for this rock, this is a little bit of a rougher style, but you can go and scale it down, the whole thing, add a little bit more noise, and make it a bit more a detailed painting. By the way, talking about procedural workflow, the rock is just nothing more than a primitive that has been cut up with the Voronoi fracture object. So Voronoi fracture object on a cube, turn the pieces in the Voronoi object, add some displacement and FFD, and you have a rock. So let's look at the process for this tree. The trunk and the branches are just made of plain old sweeps. Throw in a displacement deformer to get a little bit more variation and slight irregularities. And that looks good for now. So to get the shader for the bark, I'll just take a cylinder so I can see what I'm doing better. This way, by the way, the same light setup as with the sphere, just a background object, an infinite light source, and an environment object. And add the base color. In this case, it's simply 50% gray. The reason why it looks brownish here is because I like to give the light source a little bit of a yellowish tint, so it looks a bit warmer. If you have just like pure white, it looks a bit cold, for my taste at least. So I usually give the light sources a little bit of a warm touch. This the first noise layer, then add more noise and a colorized layer to give it a wooden feel. Then again, it's more noise, and here comes the bark texture, which you can probably tell by now is just a noise. As I said, there's such a wide variety of noises. You can find a noise that suits your texture when you play around with it a little. So in this case, it's just a noise that looks like bark. And I keep on adding more noise just to dirty it up a little bit and make it more analog. And yeah, this looks good for now. So let's slap it onto the sweeps, to the trunk I made earlier. And it already looks quite tree. So the next step, I'll also add some ambient occlusion. And I don't just add the ambient occlusion as a simple layer. I use it as a layer mask for yet another noise layer. In this case, it's just a folder with some noise which gets distorted as well. It's not really apparent here in this case, but yeah, it gives it some variation. So here the color channel is done. Again, go to the luminance channel, same trick as before. Fresnel, the Loomis, and some noise overlay to break it up a little. And also here, reflectance. In this case, it's just one single specular layer. You don't need to, in every case, to have like several spec layers because there's already a lot going on in this geometry. So one spec layer is enough to give it a little bit more shine or depth. And then just add the bark, the same bark noise we used in the color channel, add it as a bump, and there you have your bark. The little grass patch below is nothing more than a disc with two different hair objects. One does the small grass and one that does the bigger leaves. And onto the crown of the tree, the base geometry is just a few blobs stuck into each other. Give it some simple textures, of course, noise. So we need the texture that the hair object can pull the texture from the base. And also because if it shines through that you have still some green between the leaves. And yeah, as I said, the leaves are just hair. You can, by the way, put the hair object. If you put every object in the connect object, you can just put the hair object on the connect object. No need to like put hair object on every single cube or geometry down below. You just can put it on the connect object, which is a great way to like keep your objects a little bit cleaner. So yeah, as I said, the leaves are made with hair. The color from the hair is taken from the geometry down below, and it took me quite a little bit of tinkering to get it right. The hair object is very complex, but that might be just me because hair is not really my domain. So you might be a little bit more successful with your hair objects than me. So. To make it a little bit more interesting, there's a second hair object with a little bit longer leaves and a bit to make it give it a little more variation. So again, compositing is very important to make it pop a little more. And somebody asked me online if it also works if there's moving geometry, and yes, it does. So yeah, it looks really nice. So with this technique, you can make pretty much any material you like. Here is cut wood, for instance, and here, same thing. I use a lot of noises, and I use the wood shader for the end caps. The wood shader never been used by anybody. But here it really serves its purpose to be wood. So it's a great way to keep everything procedural. So which brings me to this tavern. When you're working in this style, it's also important to keep the geometry or the style of the objects very cartoony or very simple. So this thing, all it's made of, actually, it's just cubes. It's only cubes. This here is only cubes in this scene. You can see here, cube, 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 cube. And it's very important not to name stuff. So keep it as a cube. And here add some sweeps just for the windows and the door. By the way, this door here is also it's just cubes being cut out by the same spline with a bool object. Here's a cloner for the top of the roof, and a random effector to get some irregularities in the tiles of the roof, make it a little more organic. And the base is just the base cubes just thrown into a fracture object, and that's all there is. And what I like to do when I'm working on the simple style is I just add a bevel deformer over everything. So it just makes it a little bit, gives it a little bit more depth, and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. The bevel deformer, by the way, is a nice trick to get a little bit more of a cartoony style. So for instance, when you fracture a cube and add a bevel deformer, and then throw it into hypernerbs, it's called a subdivision object nowadays. I still like the word hypernerbs because it sounds like a song by the band Scooter, if you know Scooter. Hypernerbs! Oh, okay, so this is a subdivision object. And it gives you some really nicely rounded geometry, which makes it really cartoony. So there you go. You have a cartoony base. And the rest, the sign and the lamp, of course, are classical, modeled in a simple way. And here it is. On the right side, you see all the shaders that have been used. It's all based on the basic paint shader I've done before. Just added some variation. And then again, here compositing is important. And it also works in animation. And with this technique, I can really create anything, any style, any object. For instance, taxi, or something that's a little bit more spooky, or excuse me. That's only noises. Yeah, that's the same. It's just the same technique used with this. It's the same thing. Nothing painted, and it's very simple geometry as well. You can take it a little further. This is based on the same techniques. Here you can see this is the basic geometry for the whole thing. It's really straight. It's made of a lot of cubes again, of course, or straight geometry. And what I like to do is same thing again. I'll throw the whole thing into a cloth surface, and the cloth surface subdivides that geometry without it, without rounding it, like a hypernerbs or subdivision surface object would do. So it keeps your edges straight, but it subdivides it even more. And then you can add a bevel deformer and a displacer, like just to break this up, so it makes it a little bit organic. So it breaks the same thing as I said with After Effects technique, which breaks up the lines so they are not straight. You can do the same thing with geometry. It makes it a little bit slow, of course, because you have more polygons and there's a lot more going on, but it's a great way to add a little bit more detail into your models and make it a little bit more organic and not as straight and perfect. So here is that sci-fi cube again. We've seen in the beginning, just in a different, rendered in a different way, a little bit more detailed. Also here again, now it's painted, but it's more or less the same techniques. It's just noises, more or less. And you can do something like that, which has a familiar feel if you know Simon Stollenhag, really great illustrator, which he does these sci-fi landscape things. But that's all the same technique I showed before, just noises, nothing more. No pixel textures used, all just noise and really, really simple modeling. It's just, again, it's just cubes. It's just cubes, all cubes. Cubes and noise. With cubes and noise, you can do everything you like. And it doesn't always have to be cartoony as well. This is something that looks a little bit more like a painting. And then again, this is actually, you might ask, you think that it's a more sophisticated paint shader, but it's the same thing as before. It's the same technique as the sphere I've shown before, except for the cracks. And the cracks, of course, are also noise. They're just it's just a Voronoi noise, and added some distortion to get a wiggly line. So that's it. It's really simple. Somebody also asked me if it works on deforming geometry, and it does. It doesn't flicker. So you might need some UVs for that, or just use the stick textures tag and keep the noise in a 2D space, not in a world space. But even though you can get different looks as well if you keep it in world space, so the noise doesn't stick to the geometry, the noise sticks to the world space. It can also get an interesting look, and even animate the noise if you want to have a little bit more jaggy look, so it looks like it's been painted frame by frame. Yeah, that's it. Looney shaders. Any questions? So, microphone. Hello. Hi, Caroline. Hello. Microphone. Hi, Caroline. We have a question. This guy is so loud I can hear you.
So it's all rendered with the standard renderer, of course.
Standard renderer.
So how long are the render times? So just
Well, yeah, not gonna lie,
estimate.
it's get there's pretty they can get pretty long. So this let me find it. This thing takes around 5 minutes for a full HD output on a dual Xeon machine. So
Okay.
it's not the fastest process, of course. Yeah.
That's still okay.
So did you ever try to use Substance Painter for the fully painted thing?
No, I haven't. But yeah, Substance is great, and I'd love to try it, but I'm a little bit lazy in learning new programs. Yeah. Anything else? No? So thanks for listening. Go to my site. There's some more stuff to look at. And yeah, I'll stick around the booth for a bit. If you still have a question, I'm around. Thank you very much.